When you send a new message to a message board, it goes into a slot, one of 100 or 150, depending on your boards, and you can reuse those messages later. You can basically keep a cache of 100 or 150 messages and reuse them at any time. You can also copy them from one board to another. So here I'm going to show you how to do all that. When you're looking at an individual board, you're in the show view for that board, and you scroll down, you see a stored messages area, and you can show or hide permanent messages or changeable messages, or really both. If I do that right now, I see a couple of seriously empty lists of messages. And the reason for that is that this board has never gone through an update process to bring up all the messages into the system so that we can see them here. Quick aside, permanent messages are messages that are built into the board. There are 94 of them, and they might change if you get a firmware update, but they generally don't change. So we only have to pull them up here once, and then they'll always be visible to us. Changeable messages are the messages that you yourself define every time you're sending a new message to the board. So to get things rolling on a new board, we first have to refresh our view, our notion of what the permanent and changeable messages are for this board. So we have a couple of buttons here for that. They're red because, as a warning, and the tooltip warns you also, that this operation can take quite a while, especially on a slow cell network. There are 94 permanent messages and 100 or 150 changeable messages, so this could take a while the first time you do it. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit my refresh permanent messages button, and it scrolls up to the top for me so that I will be able to see the stored messages update in progress notification. Like I said, this is going to take a while, so I'm going to pause here and resume recording this video when the operation is complete. And we're back, and we can see stored messages update complete. It took a minute and a half to do that, but I'm on a fast network. It's going to take at least 5 minutes in real life to do this, I'm guessing, on an average cell network. If we go back down now and look at our permanent messages, we see a list of them, and here they are. I'm going to do the same thing real quick for the changeable messages. Again, I'm going to pause once the operation starts and resume recording when the changeable messages have been updated. So here we go. Refresh changeable messages. Shortly I'll get a notification that the process has begun. It takes a few seconds to actually start the process, and here we go. And we're back, this time less than a minute it took to do the update. The reason for that is that there are actually fewer changeable messages usually. You have 100 or 150, but you're not likely to have used all of them. So you have a bunch of empty slots, and those are obviously quicker to update. So if I look now in my changeable message list, here are all my changeable messages, and I can scroll through here, and I can see that there are gaps. There's C1, C2, C13. So there's a bunch I didn't have to pull through. So this operation is generally faster because most of the slots are empty. And having done that once, if I do it again, it's going to be very fast. It's not going to change anything right now if I do another refresh, because none of the messages will have changed, so the operation will complete very quickly. So the nice thing is, especially for permanent messages, you pretty much only have to do this once. And for changeable messages, you do the refresh if you think that messages were changed from a different source than this application. For instance, if you used another program to talk to the board, or if you were at the board physically typing a new message in, then you'll have to do a refresh to get that reflected in this application. Otherwise, it's just going to take care of itself always. So, but the good news is, if you're not sure, you can just do a refresh on the changeable messages, and it'll be pretty quick most of the time. And again, you never have to do the permanent ones again. So we have lots and lots of messages here, and we can pick one to activate. Let's go up here for a second and see that we are currently running a blank message. Let's just pick C35, and I can click on the name here, or I can click on the dot itself, or I can click in the message area here. Either way, it will select this message, and I can say activate selected. Again, we scroll up to the top to show us what's happening. The update is in progress, as you can see by the fact that there's a blinking updated timestamp. That means I don't know yet. And after a few seconds, here we go. Message C35 is being displayed. We can see here that it's what we expected it to be, and we're done with that message activation. Exactly the same way I did that, I can activate a permanent message just by clicking it. These two are mutually exclusive, so if I click here or I click here, only one is selected, and that will be what happens when I do activate selected message. Now, how do we create all these messages? Well, let's look for an empty slot. Let's look at, where is an empty slot? They're all full. Okay, C64 looks like an empty slot, so let me define a new message for C64. I just go up here, say new message, and here's my new message form, and I select the message number that I want to do. We said C64, and my message will be new 64, and I'm going to put here 3160, which is the port number for this message board. That will be a useful reminder later when we look at something. Now, after I define the message number and the text for the message, I can choose to define and activate the message or only define it. If I only define it, I'll be filling up that slot with this message, but I won't change what's being displayed on the board. If I define and activate, I'll define the message and it will be the next thing displayed on the board. I'm going to define and activate now. Hit the submit button. I go back to my show view, and an update is now in progress. It's doing, and so C64 is now being displayed. And if we go down to look at our changeable messages list, and scroll down to C64, and wait for it to come through. Here it is. So, because I defined and activated the message from this system, I don't have to do an update now to refresh my changeable messages. That happens automatically for me. So now we know how to activate a stored message, how to define a new one, and the next thing to do is to just copy messages from one board to another. And that's fairly easy to do. Look at this over here. If we scroll up to the top of the list of changeable messages, we have a clone column. This is what we use to clone messages from one board to another. Notice, by the way, that in the permanent messages, if you scroll back up there, we don't have a clone column. You can't clone permanent messages. So let's close that and look at our changeable messages. And I can expand this a little bit so I can see a few more. Anytime you see one of these triangular thingies at the bottom of a box, that means you can pull it down or across and make it bigger. And I'm going to choose a couple of messages. I'm going to choose the ones that say 360 as one of their line, 3160, because that's my indication. That's what I use to say that I define this message board on the message board, which has a port number of 3160 on my network. And so if I take that, now here I have to check. This is a multi-select, so I can check many of them. I can take C1 and C2, and just for fun I'll take C13, and I'll take the C64 that we just defined. There. And then I just say clone selected, and I get a list of boards that I can clone to, and the board that I'm currently on isn't a valid destination, so that won't show up here, but I can choose these guys, for instance, and as soon as I submit that, I get a cloning in progress message, and it starts, and this can take a little while. It's not going to take too long. It's not like refreshing messages because I'm only copying over several messages that I selected, but and all the boards are being communicated with simultaneously, so it's not too slow, but I will pause the recording while this happens. And we're back, and that actually took about half a minute, so I might as well have left it running, but here we are. When it's all done, stored messages clone to, and it gives you a list of, they come in one at a time as each process is done, and if you count fewer than you think you clone to, then you have a problem, somebody's missing, you got to figure out who's missing. But probably if it's, under most circumstances, if somebody is missing, for instance, because communication failed with that given board, then you will also see a red box here telling you that communication failed with board so-and-so, and then you'll know that the clone didn't happen. All that's left to do now is to go and prove that the cloning happened. So remember these board numbers, the port numbers 3163, 61, 64. We're going to go back to our index list of boards, and let's just look at one of them. We'll just go into the show view of this guy. And this guy is still, he's blank. And if I look at his changeable messages, here we go, C1, C2, C13, and a few others that were there before. And C64. And the key is, I don't know if you can see in this video, but it says new 64 3160. That's the key that reminds me where I define that message. And same goes for these guys up here. Now the interesting thing about cloning, it copies messages, it does not delete previous messages. So this board already had the C14 and the C16, and they didn't go anywhere. All I did is overwrite the messages that I cloned. So it's important to remember that cloning is not an exact copy because it doesn't blow away anything that's already there. It just copies over the messages that you specified. And now I can take any of these messages, and they're just like anything else. I can say take C1 and activate that guy. And in a few seconds I should have an activation on that. And there it is. Now another interesting thing, which you didn't quite see here, is that this also was a new board that had never had a refresh done on it. And in fact, if I try to see my permanent messages, I can see that there was never a refresh on the permanent messages done on it. But because I cloned changeable messages to this board, a refresh of changeable messages was automatically performed for me, which is actually the slowest part of the cloning operation. So cloning is pretty quick, but then you have to go and refresh everything to make sure that when you go in here, you see the correct list. So whenever you clone, the refresh will automatically happen for you, and when you go into that message board, the destination of a clone, you will see the correct list. And that's about it for cloning. The other important thing to remember is that I was able to specify multiple message boards for the destination of that clone. That means I can copy one message onto an entire fleet. It's a fairly quick operation. Basically the amount of time it takes to copy that one message to the boards, and the amount of time it takes to refresh that one message from those boards back up to this list. So generally not too slow, unless you're cloning a lot of messages. And that's it for cloning, for defining new messages, and for activating messages based on a selection of a stored message.